It's working, Vaughn. I send you to backstage. Hola a todos, bienvenidos a este espacio de comunidad de Open Talks. Me disculpo por la tardanza para empezar. Teníamos algunos inconvenientes técnicos con la plataforma de streaming. Entonces, bueno, para empezar me disculpo por esto. Bienvenidos a este nuevo espacio de Open Talks. Recuerden que Open Talks es una comunidad que busca incrementar la participación de Latinoamérica en la contribución de proyectos de código abierto. Actualmente estamos muy contentos de ver la adopción que ha tenido esta comunidad. Hoy tenemos más de 500 personas que están participando de estos espacios y de las comunicaciones que hemos estado enviando. Entonces, para empezar, quiero agradecerles por esa adopción que hemos tenido. Recuerden que hoy tenemos un invitado muy especial. Hoy tenemos a Vaughn Vernon, que nos va a estar hablando un poco sobre temas de open source, sobre programación reactiva, sobre domain driven design y diferentes posibilidades que tenemos y que abre los temas de open source. Entonces, pronto, en unos minutos lo vamos a tener. Antes de empezar, quería contarles un par de cosas. Lo primero es el crecimiento que ha tenido esta comunidad. Pero adicional a esto, quiero invitarlos a que participen en varios de los proyectos open source que hoy tenemos en Bancolombia. Para los que no sepan, para los que este sea su primer espacio en Bancolombia, que es uno de las compañías que está liderando estos espacios, tenemos diferentes proyectos de código abierto que ustedes pueden utilizar en sus iniciativas, proyectos en los que ustedes de hecho pueden contribuir. Si ustedes ingresan al sitio de GitHub, que creo que aquí lo deben estar viendo en este momento, si ingresan a github.com/Bancolombia, van a encontrar diferentes iniciativas en las que ustedes pueden contribuir, iniciativas que pueden acelerar el proceso de desarrollo de software que ustedes están llevando hoy desde diferentes frentes. Se van a encontrar iniciativas para crear artefactos basados en principios de arquitectura limpia, van a encontrar herramientas que les van a permitir manejar de manera externa secretos de las aplicaciones en entornos containerizados o en entornos cloud. Van a tener herramientas que permiten hacer pruebas de carga de diferentes aplicaciones que expongan servicios REST. Tenemos librerías para manejo de caché, caché local, caché distribuido. Y además de eso, tenemos otras herramientas que, por ejemplo, facilitan los procesos de desarrollo de cara a arquitecturas orientadas a eventos. Entonces, quiero invitarlos a que visiten este sitio, a que interactúen un poco con los proyectos open source que hoy tenemos. Pueden utilizarlos, pueden aprovechar los canales que tenemos dispuestos si tienen algún tipo de inconveniente. Y además de eso, queda la invitación abierta para que ustedes puedan contribuir a estas iniciativas. Por otro lado, en este momento en el banco tenemos varias ofertas laborales. Si ustedes están buscando un nuevo reto, hoy tenemos varias ofertas disponibles en el sitio. Pueden ingresar a empleo.grupobancolombia.com y se van a encontrar con varias ofertas a las que ustedes pueden apuntarle, pueden presentarse al proceso si es de su interés y quería que lo conocieran en este espacio. Aquí, como les contaba hace un rato, ya tenemos 500 personas que participan en Open Talks. Actualmente nos están viendo 107 personas y sigue creciendo el número a medida que va aumentando el tiempo. Y bueno, creo que sin más preámbulos, el objetivo es que puedan escuchar a Vaughn, que utilicen los canales que tenemos para que le pregunten todo lo que necesiten. Este espacio, y un comentario importante es que este espacio va a ser en inglés, entonces las preguntas que necesiten o que quieran hacerle a Vaughn las pueden escribir en el chat de YouTube, las escriben en inglés y yo se las puedo enviar a Vaughn. Entonces, eso es un poco la idea. En este momento me voy a pasar a inglés para poder darle la bienvenida a Vaughn y que podamos aprovechar el espacio. Hello, Vaughn. How are you today?
Doing fine, thank you. Muy bien.
Awesome. 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 Vaughn, thanks for your time. Thanks for attending. It's great that you be here today. For us, it's great that you dedicate your time to support Latin America communities. Then it's great that you be here sharing all your knowledge about open source, about reactive system, about strategic thinking. Then it's awesome that you be here, and that's all. I think that a lot of people are very excited to hear about you. Then go ahead, and the space is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And thanks to your community in Bancolombia for inviting me to speak. And I look forward to sharing with you some information about open source and reactive, or as I like to think of it, being open and reactive. So we're probably going to think of some ideas today that maybe you haven't thought very deeply about. What does it really mean to be open, to be reactive, and being open and reactive? What are the ideas behind that? So I look forward to sharing this with you. Notice that at least in the United States, we have usually in the tiendas, the stores, a sign that says open or open for business. This means that you can now walk in the door and choose something, buy something, order food, whatever it happens to be that this store or this tienda sells or offers through their business. Well, they're open for business right now. But I want to emphasize that we're not only open for business, but we're open and reactive for business. What does that actually mean? So, being, we're first going to discuss the word being. What is being? And being open and being reactive, or ser abierto, ser reactivo. This is an important concept to understand because the word being has specific meaning that is important to us. Now, I want to explain something before we take a dive into the meanings of these words. First of all, being open and being reactive is not that simple. That's because of the way the human mind thinks. Now, most of us will associate openness in this context with open source. And Danielle just showed you some open source projects that are available for you to use. And these have to do with architecture. And so our mind might automatically say, well, this is information about open source. And it is, but is it completely limited to that? And what is reactive? Are we talking only about reactive software? Or are we talking about some kind of concept that even goes beyond the software itself, or even has an impact on what open means at a given time? Now, the reason that I discuss this in particular, the complexity or potential complexity is behind this, is because every human mind on this planet, the entire world over, every human mind has different images that they hold that represent the learning that they have achieved throughout their lifetime. And this learning not only maps to images, but we attach words and meaning to those image schemas in our mind. And when I say a word, a phrase, perhaps it's a noun and a verb or some adjectives, and whatever it is that I talk about, your mind will have a nearly immediate reaction to that, and it will try to paint a mental image and come up with an image that matches the words that I say. You may also be unfamiliar with some of the words that I say, and you'll still try to map those, and maybe you're saying, well, it could be this is the meaning, or maybe it's this is the meaning. And so we're kind of juggling a few mental schemas in our brain to try to map what I'm talking about to things that you are familiar with. But even more complex about this is because everybody has a different mental set of mental schemas about the things that they've learned, about the language that they know, about the ideas in their mind and the knowledge that they've taken in. When I describe something, many people will have a question. What do you mean? And it's not just like, what do you mean as in I've never heard of this, but are we picturing the same thing in our minds? And do the words that you're saying map to the same mental images and definitions that I know for those words in a specific context? So it's very important in human language to set context and to use visual prompts in order to help people learn. So when I put this image in front of you now, and I said that there is in each brain a number of mental image schemas, you see a brain and you're able to map that. And when I say image, you're able to imagine some kind of pictorial form or diagram or something like that. And a schema, you know that a schema means basically a way to describe the metadata about something such as an image. And some of that metadata will have descriptions, words attached to it. Okay, so this is why we have to be very careful with language and also formulate mental images that are as rich as possible when we talk about any subject, any topic. Now, this is not far removed from the ideas around domain-driven design, because domain-driven design is very linguistically motivated. Within a context, we use a certain group of words, and those words have very specific meanings within that context. And so, of course, the dive that we're now going to take into understanding the words of what does being mean? What does open mean? What does reactive mean? So we're going to look at the richness behind these and try not to limit or constrain the meanings too much until we have sort of a full mental picture of what we're discussing. So when we're dealing with linguistics in software or just in any kind of situation with other people involved, we have to be willing to not only see mentally what we are imagining and the context that we are in, but be open to the idea that others will not see mentally the same things that we see when we say certain words. They will have questions, and therefore it takes patience to share our mental schema with someone else. And it also takes sort of an intermediate schema or a common schema that we use in order to understand one another. So we want to broaden our language scope as much as possible. We want to look into the definitions of words, the synonyms for words, or other words that have very similar meaning to the words that we are using, and the etymology of words, which means the root and history. Where does a given word come from? Where was that word sort of born? What was the motivation behind forming that word? When was it first spoken? And how has that word changed over time? Because words that were spoken 200 years ago, they may have the same pronunciation, but the meaning of those words can sort of evolve over time. Then, after we have this richness of wording set out in front of us, then once we have a pure context and we have everybody examining the possibilities, then we can narrow down our language scope at that point and choose the best terminology, wording, language for the context that we are working in. And again, we're talking mostly about software today, but software systems reflect the communication structure of the organizations and the human population within those organizations that are designing those systems. So we have to be very careful to have good communication. So the word being, maybe initially you think of the word being as what? A verb, maybe? It's existing or constituting something. But notice that the word being can actually be used as a noun, a verb, or an adjective. And a noun, using the word being as a noun, discusses the existence of something or the state of something. So, for example, a person is a noun and a person exists. We can give a name to that person and talk about the absolute instance of that person, and that person clearly has state. Now, the verb form of that is actually very closely related to the existence, because the verb expresses the existing or constituting of something. So, for example, when we read an entity from a database, we are reconstituting the entity from the database persistence into an in-memory form of a record or an object. So that verb is extremely important. And you can see the overlap between the noun and the verb. Existence, existing. State, constituting. And then, of course, we have the potential for using being as an adjective. Is it an adjective's use? It means that a thing is present. It is now existing or in progress. So when we speak about something being open or being reactive, we're talking about a present condition, and most likely a condition that not only exists now, but will continue in progress, or hopefully it will continue to progress. So notice the richness that we're looking for. Of course, this is perhaps the simplest word that we are considering right now. Let's consider open, abierto, okay? Open can be used also as a noun, a verb, or an adjective. A noun use of open means that it is open, unobstructed. It's a space that is readily available, attainable, where it's a public state that can be navigated into. So if we're talking about an open area of land, that means that we can walk into that area of land without any obstruction. We're not trespassing. It is open. It is meant for public use. Okay. The verb form of open is the action of making something accessible. Open the door. So in this case, the verb form means to disclose or expose. You might think of open source. Well, this form of open source won't exist until you open the source code. You make the source code accessible. You make it, you create a situation where it is now exposed and disclosed for everyone to see and use. The adjective form of open means unrestricted access. No obstacle is involved. It is exposed to general view and knowledge. So when we talk about open source, the open part of it is an adjective. The source is the noun. So we are describing the kind of source code which is unrestricted, unobstructed, exposed for general view and knowledge. Okay, but we first must open that source verb in order to make it open, and we can also speak of the source in a title form, as in open source being a concept in itself. It is, in essence, a compound word or noun because of the way that those two words can be used to represent a very clear concept. Now, open. We think of a light switch. We can toggle a light switch on and we can toggle it off. So being open is a present state. But being open in the future requires ongoing openness. So just because something is open today in its present state doesn't mean that it will be open tomorrow, or even 1 hour from now, or a year from now. So the openness has to be ongoing for it really to truly be open. Now, open also has meaning in technology very specifically. For example, we think in terms of open architecture, open source, like I used before. Now, notice the source code on the left side, okay? And notice here that this is actually some Java code, but notice the sort of procedural way or imperative way that this source code is implemented. First of all, we're using a try-catch. And if we were looking to use a functional programming style and a functional architecture, we would not want a try-catch to be part of our implementation, because a try-catch creates a side effect. That is that we kind of lose control, and the caller of this exec method might not get return to it after this method executes, because if an exception occurs, look at what happens. We're going to throw another exception, and if that exception is not caught by the caller, well, it's going to bubble up. But even if it is caught, what do they do with it? So, for example, what happens if we want to be reactive, if we want our software to be reactive? Well, actually, this software doesn't work out very well in a reactive setting, because reactive uses essentially what is called supervision, or it is it has the quality of being resilient. And this, although you see the try catch here, you might think, well, this is resilient software because look, they're catching all exceptions and they're doing something with that. But notice there's nothing intelligent being done with that exception. All that's happening is we're wrapping that exception into another exception and we're throwing that exception, right? And very typically in this kind of programming model, the exception can even be seen in the client. For example, in the browser, maybe we dump an exception into a page or a resource that is being served back to a client, for example, in an HTTP response or in a REST kind of service environment. Well, that's not very helpful to anyone. And maybe even our exception says that didn't work. That operation failed. Try again later, right? But if we're looking to be reactive, then notice that openness includes or requires reaction to new architectures. So if we're going to remain open in the case of functional programming environment, reactive programming, which those two can be combined. So for example, with Java, you can accomplish that. With Elixir, with Erlang, you can accomplish openness as a reactive implementation. And also notice that the architecture that's new here includes hardware architecture. So when you think about the Intel Xeon processor, this processor has a lot of cores in it. I think the current limit, again, I haven't checked this maybe in a year or so, but the last time I checked, the Xeon, or the maximum sort of cores that were available in Intel's top processor was about 48. But because each core is hyper-threaded, it means that 48 times 2, right? 48 times 2, or 96 threads can be executed simultaneously. And yet, do you know what happens in most cases, like with the case of this Java code on the left-hand side, is that as soon as it gets in touch with a thread, notice, what is it doing? It's throwing an IO exception. Why? Because a file writer might fail. Notice the file writer, as soon as that file writer calls write, it is going to block. The thread that is so valuable and expensive on the Xeon processor is going to stop, it's going to pause, and nothing else in the whole application that this Java code is running within right now, that computer process running on an operating system will just pause. It will block until the IO is completed, either with a successful write or with an exception. So if we want to be reactive, we have to react to the fact that we have new hardware architectures. And I have to say, actually, they're not really that new. These architectures have existed since about the year 2002. So in reality, we are right now roughly 19 years behind the curve of hardware architecture, because we continue to use non-reactive procedural code that is imperatively implemented, and it blocks and it wastes processor resources. So what do we do about that? Well, we would like to, whenever possible, use reactive. Reactive, believe it or not, is not known, generally speaking, as a noun, but it is used as a noun when we talk about being reactive, or a case when reactive is a concept that has a name, right? It is a thing. It is a concept. Generally speaking, we use the word reactive as an adjective. So it's of or relating to or marked by reaction, readily responsive to a stimulus, okay? Which means when some concept, in the case of software, when the software component receives a stimulus, and that stimulus is generally in the form of receiving a message, that component reacts. It readily reacts or responds to that stimulus by performing some reaction that is related to the stimulus that it received, that message. Okay, but we can also speak of reactive as a noun. In fact, if you look in the dictionary, in order to find the noun form of reactive, you have to look under reactivity, because reactivity is a noun that is described as or defined as the degree to which something reacts or is likely to react. Okay, so when we speak about reactive software, or being reactive, right? Just like being open, if something is being reactive, then it readily reacts to or is likely to react to some sort of stimulus, okay? All right, so now reactive versus proactive. I don't know if you've ever heard or read much about the words proactive and reactive. And generally speaking, at least in the English language, being proactive is viewed as being more positive than being reactive, because being proactive gives us the idea, for example, in the Oxford Learning definition, that's the definition there at the bottom, proactive means controlling a situation or making things happen rather than waiting for things to happen and then reacting to them. So, for example, managers must be proactive in identifying and preventing problems, whatever those problems might be. On the other hand, reactive is occurring as a result of stress or emotional upset. That's the general idea behind reactive. So when you consider proactive versus reactive in these two definitions, well, certainly we want to be proactive, because we don't want to react to a stressful and emotional upsetting situation. And the example of that would be, for example, the team reacted with unanticipated disappointment, right? So they weren't expecting this. They didn't think about it ahead of time. They weren't proactive. So they were disappointed, right? But the manager is not disappointed because the manager was proactive and prevented problems before they happened. Is that real, though? Are those definitions really, really accurate? I mean, conceptually, our mental image schemas are aware of these definitions, because in society, we often hear that proactive is much better than being reactive. But consider a different definition for proactive. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Proactive is described as acting in anticipation of future problems, needs, or changes. So acting is the key here. And while this still talks about future problems, needs, or changes, do you know why we are anticipating this? Why does the manager identify problems ahead of time? Why does the manager identify the problem and prevent the problem from happening? Do you know why? Because they have some sort of information that tells them that something could happen or is likely to happen. Therefore, we are going to monitor, we are going to measure, we are going to observe, and if we see any indication that this kind of problem could happen, what do? We react to it. So actually, when you think about it, everything in life is reactive. Everything that we do is a reaction to something. We don't proactively, eat necessarily. We eat when we feel hungry, right? All of our body functions are basically reactions to stimuli that we receive from some automatic functions that are associated with this. When we have a conversation with our team, we react to something that someone says. When we have software that is going to handle some stimulus, it is reactive. You might think that we are proactively implementing that, but we are actually even reactively implementing that because we are aware that there is some need for us to do that. So what kinds of tools can we use for being open and being reactive? Well, first of all, I'm going to introduce you to the Vlingo Zoom platform. This is Vlingo is a company that I founded. It's an open source and SaaS-based software company, software as a service company, and we develop product. I also have a second company which is called Kalele. This is our consulting services and training organization. But today I'm focusing on a reactive platform that is open source. It's called Vlingo Zoom. And as you can see, it works well with various infrastructural concerns such as databases and infrastructure as a service such as cloud. It works for .NET, for Java and .NET, and you can see that developers can make use of the SDK. So it's an open and reactive SDK, and this means that everything within the platform is reactive. A REST resource, or as some people would call a REST endpoint, is reactive. That means that it receives a message, and when it receives a message, it does something to react to that message. One thing that it can do is send a command message to an entity in the domain model, and in reaction to that command being sent and received by the entity can emit a domain event as a reaction to that. And the event can be stored in a database as a reaction to that event being emitted. So everything in the platform is reactive, but it's also open in the sense that it's not only open source, but it represents being open to the latest hardware architectures and the latest kinds of design, idiomatic and design patterns that exist to handle both domain-driven design and reactive software development. Some other tools that we can use are, for example, event storming. Event storming is an open tool. it can be used to discover and dynamically and reactively actually learn about the experiences that occur within a software system or will occur. And we can also use domain-driven design with event storming, or use event storming with domain-driven design. Now I'm going to go rather rapidly through a tool that's available. This is one of our SaaS products that is part of the product suite for Vlingo. It's the same company that Zoom is available from, and you can actually use this tool as an online collaborative event storming tool. And you can also, from the event storming, use domain-driven design context mapping to show the relationships between bounded contexts and the upstream downstream relationships or partnership, big ball of mud, anti-corruption layer. All of these context mapping concepts can be used from the outcome of event storming. And we also have the notion of what's called topo architecture, or a topographic architecture, which is talking about sort of like the elevations. So we can look into the services, the microservices or bounded contexts, and see how each bounded context, or even the big ball of mud, here the services catalog, operate within each other. And we also support mind mapping, we support impact mapping, we support user stories, we support specification by example, or behavior-driven development, and so forth. So you can go to domorobo.io, or I'm sorry, domorobo.to, and I'll show you that a little bit later, but you can just search for Domorobo and you'll find that on the web. It's currently available for free. It is not open source, but it is open to the public for use. So after you do your event storming, notice that you can gather and arrange the tactical stacks that were discovered in your event storming, stack those, and now you have the commands that are incoming to a given DDD aggregate, the investor. So an investor can be registered, an investor can be suspended, and an investor can receive an account closed, which actually causes the suspended operation, or the message that is received by the investor. And this investor will emit investor registered and investor suspended. Well, of course, there are several more things that an investor can do, but this shows just briefly how you can model this. Now, by bringing those stacks of operations and aggregates into the Vlingo Zoom Designer, you can design those stacks into a domain model. You can describe your new aggregates. You can describe your aggregates with value objects. You can describe your aggregates with domain events. You can map your domain events from, or use them from, command methods. So for example, when an investor is registered, it emits the investor registered event. When an investor is suspended, it emits the investor suspended event. You can map your APIs automatically. So you can map, for example, /post to /investors can be mapped directly to the register method, and arrest investors /ID /suspended is a patch method that can be dispatched directly to the suspend method. And we can also manage, as you can see, the producer and consumer exchanges, which means this is the reactive part of message sending. That is, we can emit the very domain events that this aggregate supports. So for example, you can see that the investor topic is used to publish the investor registered and investor suspended events. And you can choose your schema. So this is a schema registry that is also supported. We support event sourcing and state-based CQRS. So CQRS in both cases is supported either a plain state model, state snapshot, or using event sourcing. The deployment is how you set up your HTTP server, which is also part of the Vlingo Zoom platform, your clustering, and so forth. And then finally, you can generate your code. Currently, we support React.js, scaffolding UI, and you can generate your microservice as a DDD bounded context using annotations and auto dispatch, which is the way that we feed, for example, the REST requests directly into the domain model, or events that occur outside our model into the domain model. This is a brief look at the architecture overall. Again, this is completely open. We include Vlingo Zoom Turbo, which is basically a kind of container around the HTTP server, Lattice, which is an exchange and grid producer that runs on a cluster, the Zoom cluster. We also support reactive streams and reactive persistence, which is the Symbio set of APIs. And all of this runs on top of actors, so it uses the actor model. And you can take a closer look at some of the other components or components in a deep dive that are available. You can find the documentation if you look at vlingo.io website. Okay, and notice that we purposely reduce the number of layers in a microservice. We know that the simplest way to implement is for a REST endpoint or a REST resource handler, request handler, to dispatch messages such as command messages directly to the domain model. And all of the infrastructure of this, including the persistence, is provided by the platform. So you do not have to implement state persistence or event sourcing persistence or even CQRS, because we have the ability to handle that for you. And the Zoom designer actually generates code for all of those things, but the platform itself deals with a lot of the sort of pain of persistence that can be experienced. We have a failover-based cluster that is resilient. So normally speaking, we have entities that are spread over a grid, pinned into a specific node, and the specific nodes support POJO and POCO, very lightweight models. And under the case of failure, we are resilient. We are resilient when the network fails between, like there's a network partition in the upper left, or when an entire node fails, we will recover entities to a different node within the cluster grid, okay? CQRS is supported out of the box. Lattice supports auto-persistent DDD aggregates, so you can automatically map an event-sourced aggregate or entity directly into the journal without any extra code. All that you do is implement your business logic here. The same goes for the key value store. And if you use OR mapping, we have a very lightweight OR mapping that is very, very simple to use, or you can use JPA or Entity Framework if you're, depending on whether you're working with the JVM or .NET. Okay, we support process managers or Saga. These are extremely simple to implement, and they work much like the entities of the domain model. They're automatically persisted and so forth. We support annotations, or on the .NET side, what are called attributes. These are high-level abstractions that help to implement very quickly. This is part of the Turbo container. We support reactive streams, including back pressure with the publisher, subscriber, and processor. So if you want to take a look at this, I invite you to go to vlingo.io. There you will find actually the Zoom platform, and also Domorobo is available through a link there. You can see some information about Domorobo, but if you go to vlingo.io, you can see more about that. So the idea is that you learn rapidly using event storming. You learn rapidly using impact mapping, for example, mind mapping, context mapping, specification by example, user stories, which actually in the model itself all map together. And as you learn rapidly, you can then also implement rapidly by basically importing your event sourcing result or your event storming result into the Zoom Designer, and you can actually get a fully minimalized, lightweight architecture, compressed architecture as a microservice, DDD bounded context. And I have to say, there's been a tremendous amount of work go into this. We have more than 5 years of development in this. We have a team that is a global remote team, and we work hard to make both of these tools, the Zoom platform and Domorobo, available. And we do all of this for basically no money at all. So, of course, we do appreciate donations or support contracts, and Domorobo will have a minimal cost for the more advanced features in the future. But again, we are committed to being open and accessible to everyone globally, and keeping expenses low or non-existent. So if you would like to ask more questions about this, being open and reactive for business, the Zoom platform or Domorobo, I'm open to taking your questions now. So I did probably rush just a little bit because I think we kind of got started late, so I didn't want to run fully into an hour here. So I think we're about 50 minutes in from my talk. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
It was great, Vaughn. Thanks for sharing these cool ideas and tools about open and reactive. It was very interesting. I want to invite the people that are attending the meeting. If you want to ask any question to Vaughn, you can write to chat. Actually, we have 3 questions, Vaughn. The first one is, what contribution possibilities do you have at this moment in Vlingo? If anyone is interested in contribute to something in Vlingo, where can I start?
Well, first of all, contact me. I usually put an email address, but let me hold on just a second. Let me just let's use an event storming event, and if you want to reach me, I am at I also have the same address at Vlingo, but you're likely to get a quicker response from Vaughn at kalele.io. But yes, we have work to do, and we actually I've failed to mention that we just do you see this, Danielle? Do you see my email
Yes.
address in the
Yeah, I can see your email. Yeah.
So this is just an example of, well, I'm just sort of cheating. I could have put it in a note though. So, anyway, Vaughn at kalele.io.
Perfect.
Yeah. And next question.
Okay, the next question is, based on your Vlingo experience, what do you think is the main challenge of creating and scaling an open source project? For example, the projects that actually we have in Bancolombia, which recommendations can you do?
Biggest challenge is, well, it depends on the size of your company. We are a very small company compared to Bancolombia. We're, about at any given time about 12 to 15 people working in the company, and most of the challenges that we have faced is keeping contributors who are unpaid, right? They're not working for money for us, but keeping them actually fully engaged because people get busy. One of the challenges is some contributors want to contribute what they want to contribute, which is not necessarily core to what the platform needs. And I probably made a mistake early on in sort of allowing any kind of contribution to be made. And we have a little bit, I don't think it's technical debt, but it's sort of like product debt in that it can be difficult to maintain parts of the product or components of the product that are not really core because there's not much motivation to stay busy on them. So I would say that the lesson that I've learned in that way is, be a nice leader, be kind, be open to people's contributions, but also try to help them to understand that a sustainable open source project must be limited to some extent to just the things that are absolutely needed for the platform. Then once that is successful, then you can start adding more kind of ancillary parts of it.
That's true. Actually, we have similar challenge in our open source projects about growing our community. Or yeah, that's right. The third,
Well, I will just mention another thing too. Is as a small company, we've invested a lot of money in the Zoom platform, and we've invested a lot of money in Domorobo, because most of the implementations for the past 3 years or so have been from paid developers on our team. We have had some contributions, but fairly minimal. Most of the, you could still call them contributions, but they're paid for. So they're actually people who are working for our team, right, for our company. So if you can find financial backing, get someone to support it, it's very important if you can do that.
Sure, that's true. And the third one is, and I think that it's a related one. It's, how can a developer benefit for contributing to open source? What do you think about it?
Well, first of all, you have to be very serious about it. You yourself, as a person contributing, must be open-minded, serious, committed, because actually I would say that something like probably 50% of all developers who have said that they want to contribute to Vlingo Zoom never contribute at all. They say that they want to, they go in, they realize that, oh, I really just want to watch TV at night or go to the gym or something, and you know, because I'm paid by an employer, and therefore, you know, I just would rather go have something to eat at night, drink some cervezas and, you know, something like that, and they end up just not actually contributing. So it is quite disappointing for me as an open source project leader to have people show interest and contact, and we actually have to go through a lot of onboarding and explaining, and we spend a lot of time trying to bring people on board, and then they just do nothing. And it sort of is it's sort of similar to those who contribute and then leave the project, and it's not really a core part of the project. Of course, all contributions are absolutely appreciated, but again, if they aren't core, then it ends up just being sort of that, you know, tendency to take too much time away from what's actually the most important.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, Vaughn, I don't see more questions, but thanks again for joining us today in Open Talks. I hope you you will join us again later. Thanks for your time, and again, thanks for support. This community in Latin America, I hope that a lot of people that actually see this talk contribute to your projects and to different open source initiatives. That's the reason for this community, and thanks for sharing your experience, your projects, and your ideas about Open and Reactive. It was great and very interesting.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for inviting me, and I'll be happy to speak again.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.